Hello everyone and welcome to another Bake Along, and I really do hope you bake along with me because today, yes, it's another holiday cookie. I am making apricot and raspberry jam Kolacky. Now, Kolacky are a little type of shortbread cookie with a jam filling and pinched up together in the middle. And Kolacky can mean different things in different cultures. It can even mean like a Danish pastry in some cultures, but in this case, it's a nice dainty holiday cookie. Let me get right to it. This is the type of shortbread dough. If I can show you a dough by hand, I'll mix it by hand, but this one really needs electric beaters or a stand mixer. I've already softened up my butter, so now I'm going to add my icing sugar. And in this case, I'm using 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla bean paste. And that's because I love the lovely speckle of vanilla seeds you get when you use bean paste. But please know you can use vanilla extract, the exact same measure, the exact same way. You don't have the speckle, but you have all the vanilla flavor. So I'll give this a mix. And you may notice, in proportion to the butter and even in the flour in this recipe, that's not a lot of icing sugar. That is typical to shortbread recipes. They're typically more about the butter, less about the sugar. But additionally, I'm using jam in the center, which is going to add a little moisture, but it adds the perfect amount of sweetness. All right, now it's time for the dry ingredients, and I'm gonna sift what I can in. So instead of taking the mixer off, I'm just using a piece of paper, parchment paper, and I've got my flour. And if you've seen me make shortbread cookies before, sometimes I use potato starch, sometimes I use semolina. In this case, to get the right texture of dough that suits the jam filling without getting too soft too quickly, I find cornstarch does the trick. A little bit of salt and a quick sift. And I can add this all at once to my mixing bowl. There we go. I did miss a little bit there. Let me get that little bit of flour. Now, I do also, in addition to the cornstarch, add a little bit of cornmeal. And when I was playing with this recipe, this is not traditional to a European Kolacky, but I love the texture and the hint of crunch you get by adding the cornmeal. So that has to get added afterwards because of course you can't sift it. And now I'll mix this until the dough comes together. Got my rolling pin ready. This is a rolling kind of shortbread. And you know I love to bake with unsalted butter. That way we can control how much salt we add. If you wanted to use a food processor for this recipe, of course, you certainly could. What I do is flip the order of ingredients. I put the dry ingredients first, then I add the butter last, and work it in until you get just this consistency. There we go. I'll just shimmy this out of the way. And I want to show you the consistency of the dough coming out of the mixer. This is the value of a bake-along. We don't skip any steps. The only time I have something prepared is if it's baking or if it's chilling for any significant amount of time. But there's the dough. Just move this out of the way. So it's got a nice softness to it. It's a little bit sticky because of the very soft butter. So you do want to give the dough a chance to rest first before you roll it. Let me just bring it together. You're committing the time to watch the recipe, so I want to commit the time to do the recipe as it should be done. There we go. I think one of my New Year's resolutions is to get a different table to work on. This one's a bit wobbly sometimes. So I divide the dough in two. I shape it into discs, and you can wrap or cover them and give them at least 2 hours in the fridge to set. I'll just stack mine between parchment paper, and I have some already chilled that are ready to roll. And they do set up a fair bit. So when it comes time to roll your dough, to make and shape your kolacky, you can see how the dough does set up. I actually take a second just to soften it. If you happen to watch my icebox melt-away cookie recipe, wrong recipe. My glazed orange thyme shortbread recipe. I knead the discs a little bit just to soften that butter enough that when you roll the dough, it doesn't crack. So you can make this dough well ahead of time and freeze it if you want, thaw it overnight in the fridge, and then you can even pull it out to sit out on the counter for about half an hour or so before you roll. And I am dusting my space because I'm going to roll this out to under 1/4 inch thick. I start gently at first and see those cracks developing. So when I was rolling, no cracks here. Cracks, oh no. That's why I flip the dough over, because when you keep rolling, it heals and fuses the cracks back together, except for that one that didn't happen. But keep flipping over the dough. But because I'm cutting this into, I'm using a cookie cutter, a few little cracks will be passable. It's not like a pie crust. What does count is getting it just under 1/4 inch. So in the metric world, that's just under 6 millimeters. There we go. So a little thinner than you would roll pie pastry. I've got a round cookie cutter. If you have one with a little fluted edge, that would be lovely. And I'm going to cut out some circles. This recipe makes easily 3 dozen cookies. Depending how thin you roll the dough, you may get it even a few extra. So what I do at this point, before I cut too many, is actually check how the cookie dough bends. If rolled too thick, this is why I'm specific about rolling it thin enough. If it's too thick, when you pinch it together, like so, if it starts cracking along the sides, then you know it's too thick, so roll it a little thinner. That is a great little tip that you wouldn't know until you've made dozens of them. So if this is your first time trying a recipe like this, that's a little inside information. So I'm cutting, I do have a couple little cracks in there, I just cut around them. I'm sure that happens to you when you roll gingerbread or sugar cookies to decorate. But this dough does re-roll beautifully. It doesn't toughen up, but what I do is save this piece, roll my second piece of dough, and then put the 2 scraps together and keep rolling from there. I've got a baking tray ready, and I'll just line up I'll do half a dozen to start. There are only so many cookies you want to see me fill. And so this is fun because you can work with not just 1, but 2 types of jam. If you want to just do 1 type of jam, then you put a nice 1.5 teaspoons in the center of each cookie. I'm just going to wipe the flour off my hands, but I like the fact that you can switch it up and add two types, because when it comes to holiday time, you take that little extra effort in dainty cookies like this. So I've got raspberry and apricot jam. Now the key is, when you're putting your jam in, is it's tempting to put it at the end, but I want you to put the jam towards the center. So on one side goes the apricot, and on the other goes the raspberry. I like to use 2 spoons, it's tidier that way. So one for scooping the jam, the other for placing it on the cookie. You'll get fewer drips that way. Loosen up that jam. And you know what's funny? As much as I make apricot jam every summer. I love apricot jam, but I make it very chunky, and it's a looser style of jam. That is actually not the type of jam to use in a cookie like this. You actually want the cheap, shiny, sugary grocery store jam, because it does stay in place, and then when the cookies bake, the jam almost candies a little bit, and so at the edges it gets a bit crispy, and it's just how it should be. So you can see I've got the 2 types of jam side by side, touching each other, but now when you fashion the kolacky, it's easy to do in my hand. You lift and then give the dough a good little pinch so it doesn't open up, and that is the kolacky shape. Drop it down, press it so it sits flat. It's almost like making a cookie dumpling, except you're not sealing in the jam. So I'm not hiding the jam at all, but the pressure of sealing it pushes the jam to the edges a little bit, and then the heat of the oven will draw out the jam a little bit more. Now these won't stay upright so much. As the cookie bakes, it will flatten out a little bit, so just expect that as you're making them. There, I think you get the good idea of what I mean here. And now I want to finish the top with a little shine and some cinnamon sugar. So I just have an egg white reserved from another recipe. And I'll take a little fork, loosen it up a bit. You're not trying to whip it or make a meringue, just loosen it. And then just brush the sides of each cookie. That way the cinnamon sugar has something to stick onto it. So when I'm making cookies like this, I get in assembly line fashion, and I'll roll all the dough, cut out all the cookies, line all my trays up, then do all my apricot jams on all the cookies, all the raspberry jam, fold, 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 brush, 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 and then the finishing touch, that sprinkle of cinnamon sugar on each. It's a very light cinnamon sugar. It's only half a teaspoon to 3 tablespoons of sugar, so it's not too strong. That way it's the jam flavor that comes through. Now you'll be surprised that a cookie this small takes 15 to 18 minutes in a 325 oven. Seems like a long time, but with that jam in the center, it's what it takes to cook that cookie dough through. So I'll pop these in. And I have, look at that, I've got 2 trays going on here. Here is a tray already done and cooled, so you get a sense that the dough does flatten as they bake, but you still have that fold intact, and then the 2 colors on each side. The shortbread crisps up yet remains tender, and these are just a perfect addition. If you're doing a mixed holiday tin, you've got some straight shortbread, maybe some drop cookies, maybe you'll try those icebox melt-away recipe or the glazed orange thyme shortbread cookies I have. All of those together in a cookie tin would really make for something special. And I just love, they're so easy to eat, so dainty. Couple of bites and they disappear. So this is yet another delicious holiday cookie recipe that I want you to make your own. Add flavorings to the dough, change up the jams, but just know that I know you can bake these and you'll love them. It's been my pleasure to share this recipe with you, and stay right here on the channel because you know I have more fantastic recipes coming your way. The next ones, we're talking holiday desserts. So I'll see you again soon, and happy baking, everyone. Notice I eat the apricot first. Oh. My mom loves these cookies too. Hi, Mom.